Welcome to video number 24 for Control-Shift-Enter Mastering Excel Array Formulas. Hey, we're in the Workbook Array Formula DVD book start on the sheet topics. Hey, we're here in video number 24, our last video, and we have 26 amazing array formulas to look at. All right, let's click on our link for sheet 24. I'm jumping over to sheet 24. Our first example, we have a column of words, and I just need to know which one is the longest. I actually want the count of the longest word in that column. We can use the len function. The len function tells us how many characters are in a text string. That argument is expecting a single cell. We're going to give it a range of cells. That means we're doing a function argument array calculation. Remember, if I give an argument that's expecting a single value, many values, it will give me many answers. F9. And there it is. I can see the 9 is the most number of characters, Control Z. So now I can simply wrap the max function around it. This max function is not programmed to handle array calculations, so I must use Control-Shift-Enter. Now, if I wanted to not use Control-Shift-Enter, guess what? In 2010 or later, I could use this great new aggregate function. Now, here's the thing. This screen tip will help us here. I'd like to use the max function, but functions 1 through 13 for this function can't handle array calculations. It's only 14 to 19. Notice these two argument screen tips. Function number option reference. That means only ranges up through 13. This function number options array and then k. That's what we've been using a lot. That's only for 14 to 19. No problem. If I want max, I'm going to use large 14, comma. We don't have, our array has nothing but numbers, so we can ignore nothing, comma, our array calculation. There it is, a function argument array calculation. And k will be 1. Control-Enter. No curly brackets. Absolutely lovely. Now, what if we wanted to not just figure out the largest number of characters in a cell, but look up the word? Well, the essence of what we're going to do is the same thing. We have an array created with nothing but length, right? We know that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, 4. So 4, that's the position with the longest text string. So I can use this array inside of match to figure out that it's the 4th position, and then just use index to look it up. Here's the array for index, comma, and then the row number. I need to use match to get that. Now, that's given me all of them, and I want just the max, so I say max, comma, and then the lookup array. Do need to put comma exact match, because that range is not sorted. And this is going to require Control-Shift-Enter, because we have a bunch of arguments here that are not programmed to handle array calculations without Control-Shift-Enter. You can see we got our curly brackets there. If I were to type 2013 here, it would then look up whatever the longest one is, Control-Z. Now, let's look at our next example. The next example is a lookup example. So I want a formula here that can look up June and return her rate to this cell. The problem is there happens to be some extra spaces that, for whatever reason, we're not going to go through and get rid of. No problem. We can do a straight lookup using index. I want to look up the rates, comma, and I'm going to use for row number match. I'm going to look up that name within this range right here, and comma 0, because it's not sorted. That is not going to work. And the reason why is, whereas F9, that's June with no spaces, Control-Z. That, if we evaluate it, we can see there's all sorts of extra spaces before, after, and even extra spaces between words, Control Z. No problem. We can use the trim function. Now, usually people think the trim function is great for getting a haircut or going on a diet, but no way. It simply removes all spaces except for single spaces between words. It's going to spit out a bunch of answers, F9, and there it is. All the spaces are gone except for single spaces between words. Control Z, and that argument is not programmed to make array calculations, so we have to use Control Shift and Enter. Absolutely beautiful. If I change this to Tom Dill, there it is, looking up the right rate. Now, what if this was sorted? We could simply not use index and match and Control Shift Enter. We could not use log. We could use lookup. Lookup can do array calculations. I'm going to look up June, comma, and there's two vectors, lookup vector and result vector. And both of these can handle array calculations. I'm simply going to say, hey, trim all of those. The value here will find a position in the lookup vector, comma, and then the result vector. That's it right there. That's what I'm returning. Control Enter. No Control Shift Enter. I don't see any curly brackets. All right. Next example. What if we want to count all of the characters? So I have a bunch of data in a column, and I want to know the total number of characters. We're back to the len function. I'm going to get the numbers from that entire column. This is a function argument array calculation. It returns all of the lengths. So now I simply need to add them. Now, instead of using sum function and Control Shift Enter, I'm going to take advantage of the sum product array argument. That can handle array calculations without Control Shift Enter. Now, we're only using one array, so we're not going to use the product part of sum product, only the sum. It's great when you want to add an array calculation. Enter. There's 19. Now, what about if we had a bunch of spaces in a column, and we need to actually count how many extra spaces people type? Well, this will give us all of the characters, including spaces, and spaces count as characters. Well, what do? We need, that's all of them, and we need to know how many there are without the extra spaces. So we'll do the same formula, but give it a haircut, or put it on a diet with the trim function. The trim function will remove all those extra spaces, except for single spaces between words, which is what we want here. So there's 19. We can simply subtract these two. Now, we could do this in a single cell. I'm going to, watch this, Control CC to open up the clipboard, or go to Home and open up the clipboard, Escape, and then I'm going to copy this one, the whole thing, including the equal sign, Control C. So now I have these two things. And down here, I'm going to click on the top one, put it in edit mode. I want to take all of the characters. Boop. Minus. So there I have the 25 minus the 19. We actually have three array calculations here. We're doing a function argument array calculation there, a function argument array calculation. We're actually doing two with len and trim, and then this math operation on two arrays. All right, and that'll give us all together. We could Alt-MV to open up Formula Evaluator and watch this, either evaluate or enter. So it gives me all of them. Enter, and then I'm going to subtract those two arrays. It gives me the answer. That is absolutely amazing. Now let's scroll down and look at our next example. Actually, I should have deleted this. Boop. Now, let's look up, in this situation, we have some stocks, and then we enter stock values as we buy them each day. And we want to get the first and last. But notice the first one is on the 27th here, but the first one for this next stock is on the 28th. So how do we get the first, and then how do we get the last? All right. Well, what determines the first? It looks like, well, it's always preceded by a bunch of empty cells. So maybe it's the first one that's not empty. Let's just look at an array calculation. Relative cell references, are any of those not empty? So less than, greater than, null text string. If I evaluate, oh, false, true, true, false. Okay, so the first true. Well, when we have duplicates, can we use match to find the position of the first item when there's duplicates? Yes, when we use exact match. So guess what? I'm going to use match. And what is the lookup value going to be? It's going to be true, comma, within that array. Now, that's an array calculation in a function argument that can't handle it without Control-Shift-Enter, so we'll have to do Control-Shift-Enter. And that 0 allows us to find just the first when they're duplicates. All right, I'm going to Control-Shift-Enter and then copy it down. That just gives me the position, but it's working perfectly. 1 and 5. Now I simply put this inside of index. And I'm looking up the same values there, comma, the row number. Control-Shift-Enter. Copy it down. That is a beautiful formula right there. I remember learning that from Aladdin at the Mr. Excel message board. Now the last, well, we're just going to use our big num concept for looking up last. We saw a lot of these formulas in, I think it was video 13 when we did dynamic range formulas. All right, so I'm going to look up, and I need lookup function because it can do approximate match. And if for the lookup value, if the lookup value is bigger than anything in the range, it'll always get the last one. So I'm going to use my big number. Approximation 9.99. E plus 307. That's approximately the biggest number that Excel knows. Now that's overkill, right? If you're never going to have a stock more than 1,000 or 10,000, use 10,000 there. But that's it. The lookup vector is not only going to find the position, but return the value. Look at that. Control-Enter, double-click, and send it down. Now there's no array calculation there. That's just straight get the last one. All right, so that's pretty cool here. Now what if for this next example, we have the value, and it's the first amount we paid. But we also want to look up the date. No problem. This is the formula we just did. I'm going to copy this in edit mode. The only thing we have to change, Control-V, is instead of this match still finds the right number. Boop, that's going to be 2. But we need to change the array. Instead of the actual values, we highlight the dates and F4. There you go. So now it'll look up, based on the first non-empty cell, the date. Control-Shift-Enter. I can see those curly brackets up there. Double-click and send it down. All right, our next example is a cool one. Number 10 down here. We want to look up an entire column of data, and then within that column, match a criterion, and then get all the items and display them vertically. So here's the deal. Day 3, job 4. We actually need to look up the column for day 3, which would be this. And then within that, we need to say, oh, there's a job 4, job 4. The positions are 2, 4, 8, 9, 10. And then jump over and get all of these employee names and display them vertically. Now, the cool thing about this is the internal part of the formula, looking up a column, is easy to do with the index function. Back in video 1 and 13, we saw that it's easy to look up an entire column. Now, actually, look at this. I better close this clipboard. And in this cell, we're first going to count how many jobs there are in whatever column it is we looked up, and then we'll extract. All right, so the formula element that looks up a column is we'll use the index function. We'll give it a two-way array. And I'm going to lock this with the F4 because I'm going to use this formula element over here also. Comma, and the row number. That's the trick for us. What are we looking up? We're looking up a column. Well, what do we want when we get a column back? We want all the rows. So to tell the row number, hey, give me all the rows in this two-way table up here, you either put a 0 or leave it empty. Now we can get our third argument, which is column number, and we'll use the match. I'm going to say lookup day, F4, comma, within F4, and comma. I'm going to leave the last argument off because this is sorted. It's day 1, day 2, day 3. That match will always give us the position, right? It just tells us which column. And then because we left the row number empty or with a 0, it'll know to give us all the rows. Close parentheses on the match, close parentheses on the index, highlight, and F9. Wow, that is so cool how to look up a column. Now, it's important to remember from our earlier studies that when index delivers that F9, it is an array syntax. So we think it's an array calculation. But Control Z, index always delivers a range, not an array. So guess what? We can use this in our COUNTIF function. Whoops. That says range. That is a range. We come to the end, and within that looked up column, I want to count how many jobs there are. Actually, I'm going to copy. All right, Control Enter. No, Control Shift Enter. There are 5. If I was to change this to day 1, oh, look, there's only 1. Control Z. Now, our data extraction formula. Well, we are looking up a column. That column, we now need to figure out which rows. 2, 4, 8, 9, 10, right? So we're going to do, we have multiple duplicates. Anytime that's the situation and you want to return multiple items, we're going to use index. And then for row number, we're either going to use small or aggregate. I'm going to use small here. I have an example of aggregate down below. So index. The whole array, well, I'm looking up these names, F4, comma, it's the row number. And we have multiple row numbers, and we need a single row number as we copy down. So of course, we'll use our small. The condition, because I want some row numbers. I don't want all of them, just the ones that match this job for. So our if condition is anything in this column equal to job 4? Well, I already have the range to put here, Control V. That is anything in there equal to, and I can't quite get to my job, so I'm going to click there and down arrow, and then F4. Now, that is a range, but guess what? Now we're doing an array operation on that range. So this is now an array calculation in the logical test argument. So of course, that's going to require Control Shift Enter, comma. And if we get some trues there, F9, what do we want? We want the row number, Control Z. We've seen this, what, 25 times already. We take the row of all of those, F4. We subtract the very first, the row of the very first cell, F4, and then add 1 back in. That will give us F9, all of the relative positions. Control Z. I'm going to close off that. The false we don't need to put. And now the array F9 delivers just the relative positions of job 4 on day 3. Now, small needs to extract these 1, 2, 3 as it goes down. Control Z. So I'm going to, in the K argument, do our little formula number incrementer. All right, so row I'm sitting in what? B84, B $84, colon B84, close parentheses. All right, so that's the K. Close parentheses on that. That's the row number, that entire small F9. Of course, it will give me 2 because that's the first time we see job 4. Control Z. I'm going to close parentheses on row number. And this will require Control Shift Enter. So Control Shift Enter. I can see those curly brackets up there and copy it down. All right, to turn the num error off, I suppose you could use if error. However, if it was there was a lot of formulas and whatnot, if error would always run this calculation lots of times. So instead, I'm going to say, rows, are you greater than our, and I can't get to that, so I'm going to down arrow and F4. Are you greater than our hurdle? If you are, then please show a null text string, double quote, comma. Otherwise, run the lookup formula. Control Shift Enter. Double click and send it down. Now, if I change it to day 1, oh, that is absolutely beautiful. All right, Control Z, 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 Z. Ooh, Control Y. All right, one more point about this formula here. We just used the small function. You could also use the aggregate function to get your array of row numbers that meet our condition. Aggregate doesn't require Control-Shift-Enter. And you got to remember for the array, the numbers go in the numerator. See that division right there? And the condition goes in the denominator. And of course, it delivers divide by 0 and row relative positions instead of false and relative positions. All right, our next example. Hey, we have some numbers in a column, and we want to add just the unique ones. Now, we did back in video 17 a lot with frequency. And then in 18 and 20, we did like 20 examples of unique count formulas. And in all of those, the frequency was the trick. If you have numbers and you want to either count or add, like we're going to do here, unique numbers, the data array, comma, and the bins array, these are the upper values, have to be exactly the same range. Now remember, frequency will ignore duplicate bins. Not only that, but notice F9, frequency, if you count these, there's one extra category. That's always to catch any extra large values that might be there. All right, so what do we do with that? F9, that gives us only a number greater than 0 in the position of the first unique item. So we say to count them, greater than 0, that'll give us trues and falses. And we want ones and zeros, so we wrap a parentheses around it and a double negative. And we want to add them for unique count. So we sum product. No problem. We already did that. The only difference now is that's a single array. It's just calculating the array, and then the sum part of it adds. But now if we want to take from that string of ones and zeros and multiply it by our numbers, then we can add unique values instead of counting. Now, what's the mistake that I made? We just mentioned, what does the frequency do? It spits out one category more than the bins we gave it. So you got to make sure, if you're going to use frequency, that the actual second array, boop, you do one more. And now, no value error. The value error came from the fact that the two arrays were not the same dimension. Control Enter. So there we have added. Now, what if you wanted to do it, your values are situated horizontally? Well, we know that the frequency function spits out a vertical array, so we can't multiply using SUMPRODUCT vertical array and a horizontal array because they're not the same dimension. But no problem. What we're going to do is we're going to take the result of the frequency function here, use the transpose. That'll take it from rows to columns, F9. And now we have our ints. This is the unique count part of it, but these are columns. You can see the comma. Comma means column in array syntax. Control Z. So we simply come to the end. That's a single array, comma. The second array are actual values. And same thing, one more. And now we can add. Now what about an empty cell? Let me do this up here. Delete. What? A value error? Well, the frequency, let's see what it spits out. Actually, it's programmed to ignore that empty cell. So right here, instead of delivering 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, F9, it delivers 7 values. Control Z. So that's not going to work if we have empty cells. Control Z. No problem. We saw a more robust formula. And the trick we did was, instead of using straight ranges for data array, we had to say if not empty, then run the match with an array calculation there. Same ranges in each one, just like the frequency. And then if we got any trues there, in the data, the bins array, we have all of the relative positions. We said sum if. The frequency right there, F9, that's the logical test. It gave us a number in just the position of a unique item. Now, the logical test, of course, interprets all of the non-zero numbers as true. Then for the value of true, we put a 1. escape. Guess what? If you're adding, counting, you just put a 1 right in this argument. If you're adding, you put all the values. That's the only difference. And then Control, Shift, and Enter. Absolutely the more robust way to go when you're trying to add these numbers and there may be empty cells. All right, now, next example, rank with condition. Now, the thing is, there's no rank if function that we can use, so we have to create something that will do this for us. Now, when we look at this column, we have departments, and I'm only interested for ranking in finance, and then next I'm interested in operations. So if we have 3 finances in this department, I want to only look at the numbers in the score department and rank them. Now, if you think about this, there's 2 conditions, because we're going to have to build an array formula. As I copy the formula down, I need to say, is the ranking involved with finance, and what is the rank on the number? I left these numbers here. I'm going to delete them. All right, we're going to use SUMPRODUCT. SUMPRODUCT has so many amazing uses. And we're going to multiply 2 arrays because we have 2 conditions. Double negative, open parentheses. The first one's highlight the whole column, F4. Is anything in there equal to finance? Now, all this does is it gives us, as I copy down, a changing array. That's the relative cell reference. Right here, F9, it gives us the position in this list of the finance department, Control Z. Now, the second condition, comma, the array, double negative, open parentheses. I'm going to ask a question of the entire column, F4, and I'm going to say, hey, all of the numbers, are any of you guys greater than the current number we're looking at? Now think about the current number right here for finance. 1, 2, 3. How many of those other numbers are greater than 68? Just 1. When I copy the formula down, I'm going to be asking the question, how many of the finance numbers in this column, or is 70, how many of the other numbers are greater than 78? Would be 0 here. So let's see what this one does as I copy it down. Control Enter. That's just as we expected. And when you get first, you get 0 because the conditional question is for this cell, for all of the finances in this column, look at all the numbers here. And for this particular number, how many of the other ones are greater? 0. So all we have to do to get first, second, third is then add a 1 to the end. Rank with condition. Absolutely awesome. All right, our next example. Now, the situation is we have a lookup value in a single cell that contains 2 characters. And lo and behold, those characters are in separate columns. We still need to use this, compare it against 2 columns, and look up and bring sunset back to the cell. Now, we're going to see 2 solutions. The fastest calculating is going to be the match and index. So the index, well, what am I looking up? I'm looking up these. And for the row number, I need the relative position, so I'll do match. The lookup value is easy. The lookup array, hey, we're going to do a join array calculation. Ampersand and just join these together. So from 2 columns, F9, we get now a single column. Totally cool. Control Z. Comma, and then we're doing exact match because that's not sorted. Now this is an array, join array calculation. That argument requires that we use Control, Shift, and Enter. So that'll work. And guess what? That solution is at least twice as fast as this next solution. And you could see I have timed these, and those are the times I came up with. You can look at that workbook. It's in the timing folder. Now, what if you wanted to use VLOOKUP or had to use VLOOKUP for some reason? Well, we would have to somehow create a table, because VLOOKUP requires some table with a single lookup column and then some column to retrieve something from. Check this out, VLOOKUP. Our lookup value, we're just going to have that value there, comma, and we're going to create our table. Now we're going to actually use the choose function to mash 2 columns together to create inside our formula the actual table array. All right, so we're going to use choose. Now, choose is a function. You usually give it an index number like 1, 2, 3, 4, and it takes whatever the third value or fourth value is from inside this argument. But we're going to give it an array calculation here. I want 2 columns simultaneously. So in array syntax, I'm going to curly bracket 1, comma 2, close curly brackets. Usually it gets a single 1, a single 2, a single 3, a single number, but we're giving it 2. That means please get the first and second item simultaneously, comma, the first value. Well, I need a column in as the first lookup column in the lookup table, so I'm going to mash them together. That's just like what we did in the match function, F9. Notice it's a single column, semicolon, semicolon, semicolon. Go down on the row. That's the value 1. The value 2. And lo and behold, when I close this off, because I told the choose to get both of them, F9, we have just made a lookup table inside our formula. Notice the array syntax. BB, comma means go over a column, and belen. So the lookup value is in the first column. The value we're going to retrieve is in the second column. Then semicolon means go down a row. The next lookup value, the next item. Absolutely amazing. Now we finish this off, comma, the value we're returning is in the second column, comma, we're doing exact match, so I'm doing 0. Those things actually do look like they're sorted, but we're going to assume they're not. And this is an array calculation, so I have to use Control, Shift, and Enter. Absolutely amazing. If I put BB, works like a charm. So a couple array operation, a direct array calculation, join using ampersand, and then a function argument using an array constant. Our next example, down here 16. We're going to add with criteria from multiple columns across multiple sheets. Now, here's the problem. Here's our setup. We have criteria here, and we have week 1, week 2, week 3. Let's go look at these. And if we're doing SUMIF, there's the criteria. We're going to need a column with all the criteria and a column with numbers to add. So I'm going to look over here. Oh, there's the B column with the criteria and then the C column. Over on week 2, same setup. So notice so far there's actually 2 B columns with criteria. And when I go over to week 3, that means there's 3 columns with criteria and 3 columns with numbers. So we can't simply go SUMIF and put those 3 different ranges there. It's just not going to work. Now, luckily, there's a function we can use called INDIRECT. And it'll allow us to construct from 3 different columns on 3 different sheets a range that SUMIF can understand. Now let's look at the syntax for a sheet reference. I'm going to type an equal sign and click on week 1 sheet and just highlight this column and then enter. Value error because we have more than one value and we're trying to enter it. But look at this. The syntax for a sheet reference is you have to have a single apostrophe and then the name of the sheet, another single apostrophe, an exclamation point, and then the cell references. So check this out. I'm going to put this right here. Here's how we use INDIRECT function. INDIRECT. What does it do? It takes text in this argument right here that represents a reference and converts it back to a reference. So here's what I'm going to do. You got to put sheet names in some cells somewhere. And then I'm going to, remember I need a single apostrophe sheet name and another single apostrophe. So in double quote, single apostrophe, double quote, right? I had to put that single quote in double quotes, and I have to join it to, and boom, I just highlight the range with the sheet names. Sheet name, sheet name, sheet name, right? And then I ampersand, and I have to add the rest. in double quotes, a single apostrophe, then the exclamation point, that means sheet reference, and B2 colon B7. End double quote, close parentheses. Now, if I evaluate this, it's only going to show me the first item from each column. F9, west, west, east. Control Z, I'm going to Control Shift Enter. You can see it's west, west. It's just showing me the first part. But guess what? The function SUMIF will see all of the numbers. All right, now we're going to need to put this twice. Remember, B is criteria. C column is the number. So I'm going to copy this. Control C, SUMIF. There's SUMIF. The range, comma, criteria. Oh, it's the west. Comma, the sum range, Control V. And I'm going to change the B's to C's. All right, so there we have our sum range. And now, when we've used SUMIF, COUNTIF, match, all those functions, and we put more than one item into an argument that expects a single item, it pops out a bunch of values. But here, we only have one criteria there. But this indirect function, it is going to deliver 3 columns, which will force SUMIF to deliver 3 values, which will be, those 3 values will be the conditional sum from each sheet. So F9, absolutely amazing. On the first sheet, we had west a total of 60. On the second sheet, 110. On the third sheet, 120. Control Z. Now, what do we have to do to add those? Sum product. Remember, we have an array that's doing an array calculation, and we want to add. We're just going to do sum product. It's amazing how many times we can use sum product and then enter. Absolutely amazing. Now, indirect is a volatile function, which means it recalculates often. We do have another option here. We could go to each sheet and create a formula. Now watch this. I'm going to do something tricky. I'm going to highlight, because each sheet I have the same cell. So we're going to put a SUMIF here that's looking at just the one sheet. Get the criteria from the sheet over sheet number 24. But we're going to put that formula on each sheet. And then we'll do what's called a 3D cell reference here and look at the results from the SUMIF functions which are sitting on each sheet. Now, obviously, not all the time you're allowed to do that. But if you were, this would be great. All right, so I'm going to come over here. And I'm going to do something tricky. I'm going to highlight all 3 sheets at the same time. I'm holding Shift. And then I click on the last sheet. All 3 sheets are highlighted. When I do anything now, I will drill through, and all 3 sheets will get it. This is dangerous. Don't forget to turn it off. SUMIF, the range, that's with the criteria, comma. The criteria, I'm going to skip over that for a second. The sum range, the numbers right here. On each sheet, it's looking at its own ranges, right? Close parentheses. Now, I'm going to, in the criteria, go back to sheet number 24 and click on my criteria. I'm going to Control Enter. So now I'm going to immediately deselect these sheets, because if I start to do anything, it'll do it to all. If I typed a number here or something, it would do it to all the sheets. I'm going to right-click, Ungroup, or you can click on any sheet. All right, now F2. Wow, that is so cool. It worked. And on each sheet, F2, look at that. It's looking at their own value. So there's the 110. There's the 20. There's the 60. I come back over here, and this is a 3D cell reference, just the sum function. And I need 3 cells from 3 different sheets. So I do start it off by clicking on week 1. I can see the sheet reference syntax evolving up here. I click on the E2. Now it says week E2. I hold Shift. And now I'm going to click on the last sheet, week 3. And then I'm going to look up in the formula bar. You got to be kidding me. Look, it put a colon in, which means please take all of the E2s from sheet week 1 to sheet week 3. And that colon is just like a range. If I were to ever insert any sheets, the thing would update. Now I'm going to Control Enter. Now you want to make sure that you use Control Enter, because we were back on that sheet making a formula. You either want to hit Control Enter or Enter. You don't ever want to click back on the sheet when you're doing a sheet reference. Now there it is, amazing 3D cell reference with our SUMIF functions on the sheets. I actually learned that amazing trick from Jeffrey Brown at the Mr. Excel message board. All right, our next example. Scroll down here. Now, in this example, we have some day information, and we need the max of the running 2-day total. So down here, I went ahead and made a formula. That's the 2-day total, right? And so if I copy this formula over, I'm automatically looking at summing just the 2-day total. And then you got to calculate the max. If you did it longhand, it would look something like this, right? Max of the sum of that, the sum of that, et cetera, et cetera. Now, what we want is something less manually intensive, right? We don't want to have to create this down here. We don't want to have to create a formula like that. We just want a formula that will do it for us. Well, look at this. If somehow we could get all of these ranges in one formula, we could use the subtotal function. The subtotal function could take various ranges like this and add them all up for us and spit out an array of these 2-day totals. We're going to use the offset function. Remember, in video 13, we talked about dynamic ranges. Offset and index are functions that can create ranges. So let's see how the offset might work here. Now, offset, you got to give it the starting position, comma. Actually, I'm going to create my formula over here. My reference is the starting position, comma. Now, for the first example, I'm just going to show you how I create the first 2-day thing, and then we'll add an array element. How many rows do I want to go up or down from that starting position? None. So I'm going to put 0, comma. How many columns do I want to move over from the starting position? Well, for the first one, we don't want to move any because we need this cell and the second cell, right? So I'm going to put a 0. We'll come back to that in just a moment. Comma, the height, it's going to be 1. Comma, the width, it's always going to be 2, F4. All right, so now if I highlight this in F9, you can see it gives me 3 and 10. If I were to change the column number to 1 and F9 it, now you see it's, 10 and 6. If I change the column, again, that's from the starting position. How many positions do you want to move over? Move the starting position. If I changed it to 2, you got to be kidding. The starting position is not here. It's 1, 2. And it's got those 2 right there. So the trick is this argument right here. We're just going to give it an array calculation. There are 7 days, right? So I need 0 to 5, because the first one starts here. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right? So columns number, I'm going to build an array constant. 0, comma 1, comma 2, comma 3, comma 4, comma 5 in curly bracket. Now, if I highlight this, what it's going to do is it's going to create 6 total ranges, just like we saw down here in the sum. F9. Now, it's not going to show me in F9, but the subtotal function will understand it perfectly. Control Z. Let's put it into subtotal. Subtotal. You usually only use this when you're doing the subtotal feature or in the table feature with the total row, right? So subtotal. And I need to add, so I'm going to use 9, comma, and there's our reference. Now, you're not going to believe this. Let's highlight this and F9. Those boop, 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 are the same numbers we had here when we did it manually. Control Z. Now we simply do what? Put the max around it. And guess what? That is an array calculation, but it's done with an array constant. One of the rules we learned earlier in the video is when you're using array constants, not going to require Control-Shift-Enter. Just Control-Enter. I don't see any curly brackets up there. And then copy it down. Absolutely beautiful. We could make this even more dynamic. Notice we hard-coded these values in. So if the template changed, we added more days or something like that, then this wouldn't update. So I'm actually going to copy this. Control C and paste it right here. Copy it down, leave that one there, and then amend this one. So how in the world would we create a dynamic array from 0 to 5, but if we added a bunch more days, took this and dragged it way out or something like that, how would this change? Well, we can use the indirect function like we did in our last example to go from a text item that represents a reference back to a reference. Now, I'm going to use the indirect function. And inside the reference text, I'm going to, in double quotes, 1 colon. That means one row colon to some other row, end double quotes. And I'm going to join it to columns, because the information for how many days there are comes from those cells right there. Columns will count how many. I'm going to close this off and delete that curly bracket. If I were to F9 this, you can see it gives me 1 to 7. Now that is a reference that means first row to 7th row, but it's text. But that's not going to work. I don't really want 1 to 7. I want 0 to 5. So from the columns, I'm going to subtract 2, F4. Now, why did I not put any parentheses? Because the minus and the ampersand happens way at the bottom of the order of operations. So this will calculate first before that. Now, right now, F9, that gives me 1 to 5. I really need 1 to 6 and then subtract 1, Control Z. So I subtract the 2 and add 1 back in. Now, from the indirect here, F9. Oh, it won't calculate because it's too big. Anyway, that gives me what I want now, 1 to 6. But I need it actually wrap the row function around this. And then we can evaluate F9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we need to just subtract 0. And that is, I'm subtract 1. And now our columns with the subtracting 1, F9, there it is, dynamic. Control Z. And this is an array calculation. Let's see. Yes, right there. So we have an operation on an array of values. So we're going to, if we hit Enter, it doesn't work. But if we Control Shift Enter, we got our curly brackets up there, and our formula works. That is a pretty cool formula. And this formula here, with the offset subtotal, I learned that from Dominique at the Mr. Excel message board. All right, let's go look at our next example. Scroll down here. 18, example 18. Hey, this is a great one here. We have some descriptions of boomerangs just purchased at an auction, and here's the auction result. And we need to look up actually inside the text string. And if it says fast catch, freestyle, or accuracy, I want the cell to say fast catch, freestyle, or accuracy. So from the description, I need to look up one of 3. Let's see, down here, this one has freestyle. I need to, in that text string, look up one of 3 things. And if we find it, return it to this cell. Now, let's look at the search function. The search function is great. It can look in a text string for a particular subtext string and tell you what position it is. So if I say find text fast catch, within this, it's going to tell me whatever the 18th character or whatever that is. It's the 25th character where the text string fast catch starts within this larger text string. All right? But find text is expecting a single value. If I give it a bunch of values, I'm now doing a function argument array calculation. I'm going to hit the F4 key. And, of course, from our study we know, that means 1, 2, 3 things put into the find text. That means search will spit out 1, 2, 3 things. 3 things. F9. Oh, so you can see from that input right there, I'm going to Control Z, Control Shift Enter. Remember, 1, 2, 3. These 3 items determine or say, hey, spit out 3 things. So because freestyle is in the position of the first one, it says, oh, it found it in the 25th position. Now that's an array of values, Control Z. What happens if I Control Shift Enter and copy this down? It's not going to work all the way down unless it finds the fast catch. So let's come down here. There's a freestyle here. Highlight F9. Oh, so we're getting an array of values. The reason the 17 is appearing in the second position is because freestyle is in the second position. But guess what? That is 1, 2, 3, an array of values. We can actually do a lookup function. Find where the number is. That position will then tell us to take freestyle and put it in the cell. So I'm going to come up here. Now, before we do the lookup function here, notice that search is looking in a cell at text. It would be helpful if we knew the maximum number of characters allowed in the cell, because we're going to use our big number concept to always find the last one. So I want to come over here, and all I did is I used the repeat function. Repeat is great, right? You can repeat things. Now the text I'm going to repeat, I'm just going to pick the skinniest thing I know. That's an exclamation point. And I'm going to repeat it. How many times? 2,15. Value error. But check this out. If I do 215 minus 1, that is the maximum number of characters allowed in a cell. So if I use the big num 2 to the 15th, for this particular lookup situation, it'll always find the last one. So I'm going to use lookup. A lookup is great because it can handle array calculations in the lookup vector and the result vector. So lookup, I'm going to do 2,15, 2 raised to the 15. Now, all this would do is it's going to use some big number and always find the position in this array. I come to the end. And what is it that I want to return to the cell? These values right here, F4, close parentheses. By the way, this formula assumes that we're never going to have freestyle and accuracy in the cell. If we did have that situation and we wanted to list both of those words, that would be a completely different formula, right? Because we'd have duplicates, and we'd have to return multiple items to the cells. All right, so I'm just going to Control Enter. Double click and send it down. Now I'm going to get rid of these NAs by using the if error. We have to run this whole thing in either case to find the error or do the lookup. So I'm just going to use if error and then come to the end, value if error, double quote. Control Enter and copy it down. Absolutely beautiful. By the way, this formula, this lookup 2 to the 15th, search with an array function argument array calculation here. I first saw this amazing lookup formula from Barry Houdini, I think way back in 2008 at the Mr. Excel message board. And I think it was his submission for that month's formula challenge. All right, that's a pretty cool formula. Let's look at our next example. All right, we'll scroll down here. Example number 19. All right, lookup multiplying. Well, we've already done lookup adding, and we used the SUMIF and SUMPRODUCT. Now, here's the situation. We have probabilities, 0.8, 0.2, and F represents caught the fish. NF means didn't catch the fish. And here we have, we're building the complete sample space. And for each one of these rows, we need to multiply. So for the first one, we need to multiply 0.8 3 times. For the second one, we need 0.8, 0.8 for these two. But for the NF, we need 0.2. So in some ways, this is a look up 3 things and then multiply. So as I copy down, I'm always looking up 3 different things. Well, if you remember back to video 5, we used the SUMIF. We made a function argument array calculation. Now, the range here are going to be these 2 letters up here, and I'm going to have to lock it. And then comma, the criteria are going to be relative cell references. Now, notice there are no duplicates here. Also notice that this is a function argument array calculation. I'm giving it 1, 2, 3 criteria. So it's going to return 3 values, comma. The sum range are these numbers, F4 to lock it. Now notice, there are no duplicates here. So it's never, we're not really using SUMIF in the normal way where we're adding because there's lots of duplicates. It's just going to look up based on the criteria, 1, 2, 3. It's going to find 1, 2, 3 and return the 0.8 3 times. Let's just highlight this in F9 and check it out. There it is. Control Z. Now, what do we want to do with those values? We want to not sum. Back in video 5, we used sum product. Here, we're just going to use the product function. Now, product function number argument does not automatically calculate a recalculation. So we're going to have to use Control Shift and Enter. Double click and send it down. So working perfectly here. If we look at the inner parts of this, the SUMIF for our lookup part of it, we're looking up F, NF, and F. So we should get 8, 0.2, and 8. And when I hit the F9 key, boom, that's exactly what we get. And then product multiplies. All right, let's look at our next example. We'll scroll down here. And our next example, example 20, we want to sum every third row. So here we need to somehow in a single cell add just the numbers every third row. Now, I'm actually going to come over here and put a 1, and I'm going to hold the Control key with my angry rabbit cursor and drag down. That increments number. Those are our relative positions. And to help us understand how this formula is going to work, we're going to do a little calculation here. Now, every third row, well, the mod function gives us remainder after doing division. So the number I'm going to take to divide is this relative position, comma, and then the divisor is F4 D260 because it has a number 3 there. So this will just give me the remainder. Control Enter, remainder 1. Copy all the way down. Only when it gets position 3, 6, 9, relative position 3, 6, 9, etc., do we get 0, 0. So we can convert that to trues and falses with, hey, is that equal to 0? All right, so we need to simulate these two things in our formula. We know already, I think 20 times we've done it, how to create an array of relative positions. But we're going to do it inside the mod, right? Because the number needs to look at all those. So I'm going to give me the row of all of these, F4. Subtract the row, F4 plus 1. Someone should count and figure out how many. I think we've done that like at least 20 times, maybe even more. All right, the divisor, that number, F4. Now, if I highlight this and F9, there are our remainders for the entire set of numbers. Notice this is a helper column inside our formula. We simulate that helper column, Control Z. Now I'm going to say equal to 0. That'll give us trues and falses. And I would like to convert those to 1s and 0s. This is going to be our array, our first array inside of SUMPRODUCT. That array right there, F9, gives us only where we see the 1s, Control Z, comma, array2. Do we want those numbers to add? F4. Well, we don't need to lock anything here. I've been hitting the F4 key even though I didn't need to. All right, so there you go. 11. If I change this to 100, there it goes. It'll only take every third number. All right, Control ZZ. All right, let's scroll down. Look at our next example. Example 21. Hey, we have retail price, and from a wholesale catalog, we have our series discount. And from that, we need to calculate what's called the net cost equivalent. That's going to involve extracting all 4 discounts, dividing by 100, because we need our decimal, and then taking 1 minus each one of those series discounts to get the complement, and then multiplying them. All those calculations will deliver our net cost equivalent. So the inside part of this formula is first going to have to extract simultaneously those 4 discounts. So I'm going to look at the mid function. Now the mid, we take some text, and that is a text string there, comma. Let's just see if we can get that 0, 5. So it wants the starting number. 1, 2, 3, 4 is the starting position of what we want to extract. And then comma, how many characters? Always 2. So if I Control Enter, I see my 0.05. If I were to change this to 7, the 10 starts at the 7th position, so it would give me 10. So that argument's expecting a single number. We're going to give it 4 starting positions. So of course, when we do that, this is a function argument array calculation, the mid will deliver 4 items in curly brackets, 1, 4, 7, 10 in curly bracket. That's an array constant, which means we don't have to use Control-Shift-Enter. I'm going to highlight this in F9. Now notice the mid is spitting out text. Of course, we need numbers. Any math operation on text numbers converts them back to numbers. Control-Z. Oh, and we need to divide by 100 so we can accomplish both things, dividing by 100 and converting back to numbers with that divide by 100, F9. Those are the discounts, Control-Z. 1 minus to give us our complements, Control-Z, and product to multiply. And there, Control-Enter, no Control-Shift-Enter because of that array constant, and copy it down. Now, what if you have this situation, right? We're not always going to have 4 discounts. Some of them are going to have 2 and 3. And well, the trick here is we can actually use the same formula here, but how are we going to, right here, get just a 1? Here, get just a 1 and a 4. This one, where there's 3 discounts, get a 1, 4, and 7. Well, you could see over here I put the different either number or array constants we're going to need. We're going to use the choose function to look up the right start number, whether it is one of these array constants or the single number for a single one here. So inside the mid, we're going to need to look up the right item for start number. And the way we're going to accomplish that lookup is we're going to use the choose function. Now, the choose function needs an index number like 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we'll just list our different items to look up. Remember, we're looking up these either array constants or numbers. But the trick is, how are we, as we copy the formula down, here going to get a 4 for, that's the 4th item we're looking up. Here a 2, here a 3, and here a 1. Right? Because we're going to list them in that order. So the index is kind of one of the trickier parts here. Let's come over here. And since the formula is going to need numbers for the index as we copy down, it's going to, the information about what number that is comes from these cells. And notice forward slashes. Right? When there's 0 forward slashes, we need the number 1. When there's 1 forward slash, we need the number 2. So if there was a way to count forward slashes, that would be the formula element that will get our index number for choose. I'm going to come over right here. And let's look at the len, L-E-N function. That'll just tell me how many characters are there, 11. Now, if we could subtract from that the length of this thing without those forward slashes, we would get our number. So no problem. I'm going to say minus len. And how do I, from this text string, get rid of all of the forward slashes? I use the substitute function. Now, the substitute function, I'm going to give it the text, which is that, comma. The old text that I don't want anymore is double quote forward slash double quote. And the new text, our old friend, double quote, null text string, which means nothing. Now, this substitute right here, F9, oh, look, it has just that without the forward slashes. That'll be a count of 8. For length of that, F9. And 11 minus 8 is our 3. Control Enter and copy it down. Now, that's going to be one number off because we need 1, 2, 3, 4. So we simply add 1, F2, plus 1. Now, that is text number format. Control 1. Oh, I'm just going to apply general, Control Shift tilde, and then F2, Control Enter. Now, that little bit right there, 1, 2, 3, 4, that's the formula element Control C, inside of choose. Remember, we're ultimately need a different array constant or number inside the mid. So here, this is what's going to do it. I'm going to index number, Control V. That gives me my 1, 2, 3, or 4, comma. And then for choose, you simply list the different values. The first one is 1, comma. The second one is curly brackets 1, comma 4. The third one is curly bracket 1, comma 4, comma 7, curly bracket. And then finally, curly bracket 1, comma 4, comma 7, comma 10 in curly bracket. You got to be kidding me. That formula is looking up a different array constant or number just for the mid. Now, that little thing right there gives us the number. And then each one of these things are the different things we're looking up. Let's enter this, Control Enter, and copy it down. It's going to show me 1 because every single one of these items has 1 listed as the first item. And of course, you can't display multiple items easily in a single cell. I'm going to hit F9 just to check it out. This one better give me that array constant. How about down here? F9, that one gives me the correct array constant. All right, so that just goes inside of mid. Mid of what? Text, comma, and that whole thing right there, F9, there it is. The right array constant for the mid in the start number, Control Z. I come to the end, number of characters, always going to be 2. All right, and that, let's enter this and copy it down, right? All right, we didn't have to do that. We'll just F9. That gives us our array of integer discounts, Control Z. So I have to divide by 100. Then 1 minus. And why aren't we using parentheses here? We have a minus and a divide by, because division comes before subtraction. So we do not need parentheses around that. But now we simply put that into product. And there we are. Now this one's going to require Control-Shift-Enter. And double-click and send it down. Absolutely amazing. You see here, it only did the actual 1 minus the 0.05. Here, oh, and then this one also exactly 1, 2, 3, 4, just as we got up here. All right, let's go look at our next example. I'm going to scroll down here. Example 22. Here we have some numbers. And for each one of these numbers, I want to look through this list and find out the max number of times it occurs in succession. So 43 happens 1, 2, and then 1, 2, 3 times. So I need to report the number 3 right there. Now we're going to use the frequency function, and we've used the frequency function a lot. Let's remind ourselves how we did a unique count. For data array, hey, we gave it all the data. And then the bins, we gave it all the bins. Now this is not what we want because this will give us a unique count, right? F9. Frequency bins ignores all these duplicate 43s, so it gathers up just a count of 5 there because there's 5 times that 43 occurs. Control Z, not what we want, but we can alter these two arguments to get the result we want. So instead of all the numbers, I'm going to add an if function here. And in the logical test, I'm going to do array calculation. I'm going to say, hey, numbers, tell me which one in there is equal to 43. Actually, I need to lock these. F4, F4. All right, so instead of all the numbers, I just want a true for each 43. That's the logical test. That is an array calculation in the logical test argument of if, so it will require Control-Shift-Enter no matter what we put around it. Comma, and the value of true, I need some numbers here. I'm going to put the row numbers. Now, I don't need relative position like we've done so many times. I want a number. I want 326, 327, etc. So let's close this off and look at what this evaluates to. F9, 326, 327, the two numbers in succession for 43, and then a bunch of falses, and then 332, 33, 334 for these three. Now, this is the data what would we need as bins, which are upper values? Remember the bins and frequency. If you give it an upper value for a bin, it says everything equal to that and less than that. So what would we need to count these? If we had a bin of 328, you would count everything equal to or less than that number, so we could count those two. And down here, what would the upper bin need to be? 335. Well, we can do that. Control Z, take this same construction, copy, and instead of equal, we say not equal. Remember, I'm dumping rows into the bins now, and I have to just say not. Now if I highlight bins and hit F9, you've got to be kidding me. Because I said row number that's not equal to 43, there's my 328 that's going to count the 326 and 327. And there's the 335 that's going to count row 334, 333, 332. Absolutely amazing. Control Z. Now close parentheses. This will deliver F9, an array of counts in succession for the number 43. All we need to do is wrap a max around it. Control Z, max. And it doesn't look like I've been paying attention here. F4. I need to lock all of this. F4. Now I can simply Control Shift and Enter. That is absolutely amazing. Right, so for the 68, we get a count of 2. Now, our formula we just used is working on numbers, right? So the formula works on numbers. But this exact same formula will also work on text. Let's take a look here. We're trying to count the max text items, OS, that occur in succession. So I see a 2 and a 3. The reason the same formula will work is because the if, the logical test, is working off of text, but it's delivering trues and falses. It is the value if true. That's the row function, right? It's dumping numbers into the frequency function. So the formula works whether these are numbers or text, because it's row numbers that are in the data array and in the bins. All right, now let's look at another example of this. And we want to notice the two examples we just did are based off of a single column. So that formula, single column in the logical test. Let's go see what happens if you had two columns. And our example here is about a football team. I want to ask the question, Team OS, what's the max number of times in succession they've been to bowl games? But we're given a win and loss column, right? But I can see that OS, it had 2 wins and a loss. So that's 3 in succession. Here, neither one of these are OS, neither one. So those are all out. But oh, this one, there's a loss, 2 wins, and a loss. So it looks like there's 4 in succession. The formula reports a 4. But notice, if we're asking the question about OS, we're getting information from 2 columns. So how are we going to determine the row numbers? Those row numbers and these row numbers are going to be in the data array for frequency. How are we going to get those? Well, we're going to ask the question, hey, is one column equal to OS? I'm going to get true, true, false, and add it to using Boolean or the second column. Anything in here equal to OS? False, false, true. Notice the question is, did you get a win or a loss? Boolean is addition. So we simply add these two. We get true plus false, true plus false, false plus true, false, false. We'll get a string of 1, 1, 1 here, and down here we'll get 4 ones. That will determine the row numbers. That's for the data array. But what about for the bins? Remember, in order to count these row numbers, we need upper values. Frequency, we give it the upper values, and it counts less than or equal to that. So we're going to need the upper value 381, and we're going to have 388. Let's go look at this formula. I'm going to go into the frequency, the data array. Now this is the same formula we just did a moment ago, except for now we have in the logical test, we're asking the question of two columns. Anything equal to OS, that's that one right there. And then we add doing Boolean or, and then the purple one, anything in there equal to OS. When we F9, there's our strings of ones and zeros. To determine the row number, Control Z. If I go into the data array and now hit F9, there are our row numbers. Control Z. But that's the data to be counted. We need an upper bin. We need a 381, and we need a 388. Control Z. Let's come down here. Now the trick to the logical test here is this is an AND. We want only the row numbers for our upper bins when both teams are not OS. So we have to use AND. Both conditions must be met. If I F9, I'm getting the ones right in the middle. Those are the only ones where both the win and the loss is not OS. Control Z. And let's check out the bins array. F9. Now look at that. There's our 381 to gather up 378 to 380. But wait a second. We have rows 84 to 87 to count, and I don't see a 388. The reason why is the frequency. If we give it 383 as the last upper value, it always creates one extra category that says everything above 383. That is quite amazing. If I, inside of the max, highlight that in F9, there's my count of 3 and 4. The maximum number of times that OS has appeared in a bowl game in succession is 4. Control Z. This, look at this formula. What a great one to have as our almost last array formula in this video series. This has a math operation doing an array operation, a comparative. There's a couple different comparative array operations. There's another math array operation. And we also have a function argument array operation. Wow, what a formula. This one definitely requires Control Shift and Enter. There's our curly brackets up there. All right, here's our last example. How many Friday the 13th are there between a start and an end date? Now, this is a great one to end on because Mr. Excel, Bill Jelen, said this was his favorite array formula. So we got to check this one out. Now, we have a start and an end date. Well, if we're going to look through a list of dates and figure out which ones are Friday the 13th, we have to have all the dates. And we're given the start and the end. So we're going to have to, inside of our formula, create all of the serial number dates. So I'm going to start with the indirect function. We've seen the indirect function a bunch of times already in this video, right? Takes text that represents a reference and converts it back to a reference. Hey, I'm going to take that serial number and join it with separated by a colon. That colon separates row references or cell references. And then I'm going to join that. Boom. So if I highlight this in F9, oh, look, serial number, colon, serial number. Well, that is a text item that represents the reference row this to that. Control Z. The indirect will convert it back to a reference, F9. But you know what? I can't because that's going to be too big. But I can wrap the row function around it. The row function just says, give me all the row numbers, F9. And there they are. So that's like our helper column of all the dates. Control Z. Now, I need to format that in a certain way. So I'm going to use the text function. The text function takes a number and formats it with a custom number format and spits out text. That argument's expecting a single value. And so I'm going to give it a bunch. This is an array calculation. And comma. Custom number formatting in the format text argument is in double quotes, DDDD, to show the word for the day, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, etc. Space DD to show the number. So that'll say, you know, Thursday the 12th, Friday the 13th, etc. Now I can't evaluate this with the F9 because it's too long. but they're all there. And it's going to create an array. So I got it right. So an array of words and text strings that show the name of the day and the number. And I'm going to say anything in there equal to Friday the 13th. Right? So then that will give me trues and falses. I wonder, F9. Yeah, woo! That's a lot of trues and falses. Oh, there's a Friday the 13th right there. So now I just need ones and zeros because I'm counting. So sum product. I need to convert the trues and falses to ones and zeros. So I use our old favorite double negative. Control Enter. Wow, there's only 3. That is a great formula to end this epic video series about array formulas. Now, we do have one last one, but I just want to point you to YouTube, the excelisfun channel. One of the most amazing array formulas is a reverse lookup, a reverse two-way lookup. And Don Quixote at the Mr. Excel message board gave this great answer. And there's a link for the correspondence he and I had. And then here are the 2 videos I made from it. So there's lots more stuff at YouTube. But what did this video do? In fact, this video series and then the associated book put together a set of guidelines and rules and kind of showed all the elements and aspects of array formulas in a systematic way so you can watch it or read the book and really have a good understanding of how to put array formulas together. All right, we'll see you next video.